This is Mike Kegley. Welcome to Heat Checks and Hail Marys. Not a ton going on in the Big Ten or in Illini's world this week, but there are some other things I wanted to talk about. In particular, we've looked a lot at college expansion over the last 2 years as we started to run up to the bigger Big Ten and the bigger SEC that we're seeing this year. And one thing that those folks who argue for expansion have on their side of the argument is that there's going to be a lot more matchups that are really fun. I just did a cursory look at the schedule this year for the Big Ten teams. And really, there are a ton of good matchups. Let's just look at a game of the week for each week. Week one, Penn State and West Virginia. Obviously, the first week of the year, most of the teams are playing the smaller schools, the in-state schools, the easy W's. Penn State's playing a traditional rival from years gone by. West Virginia should be a good game. You would think the Nittany Lions will prevail, but nonetheless, a rivalry that produces a good game and people will tune in. The second week, Texas and Michigan, what a game that is going to be. Obviously, these two teams know each other. These two teams are raring to go, and they really want to prove this year is either A, for Texas, their year to win the title, and B, for Michigan, their year to prove that last year wasn't just Connor Stallions, it wasn't just Jim Harbaugh, and they want to prove that their program has some staying power. That should get people tuning in. I think this will be one of the highest rated games in all of college football for the entire season. Week three, Alabama at Wisconsin. Historically, except for the last 8 years where the SEC teams have started to get out of the Southeast, you could literally go back decades and not see a team from the SEC go into the North ever. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing that much more regularly, and Alabama is going to go to Camp Randall. We'll see if the home field advantage can help the Badgers. This is a tough Alabama team they'll be playing. Caleb DeBoer is taking over for Mr. Saban, so that should be also another thing that's worth watching. And of course, Luke Fickell is trying to drive that Wisconsin program upward to where they feel they're contending for Big Ten titles every year. That matchup should be a good one. Then week four, USC at Michigan. Now, these teams have only played twice in non-Rose Bowl games in 1957 and 1958. So it's a matchup that if you're a little older, you've seen a lot of times on January 1st. But this one in a regular season is a rare thing. Again, hasn't been done in my lifetime. But that should be a heck of a game. We will certainly see USC coming to Michigan. We will see them playing in Ann Arbor, and that will be a ton of fun. Another game, again, you can see why these matchups and why this expansion is happening. Now, week five, you get Wisconsin going to visit the Trojans. That could be, again, another game where Wisconsin's been out there, played in the Rose Bowl many a time. This is the regular season game. I think it should be a lot of fun. And they've only played 4 times outside of the bowl season as well. So you're looking at two teams that aren't really that familiar with one another. And I think we will see quickly how Luke Fickell's team is doing and what we can expect out of that team for the 2024 season. When you go into week six, now we're looking at a traditional Big Ten matchup. I think Iowa at Ohio State is probably the best game that week, although some people might have argued for Michigan visiting the Washington Huskies. But I think the Iowa-Ohio State game will be another game where we see, without Brian Ferentz, will the Iowa offense be any better? I don't think it could be worse, right? So it should help out the Hawkeyes. But the Hawkeyes defense is going to be tested by a Ohio State team that is just loaded at every position on both sides of the field. Going to be a tough one for the Hawkeyes, but it'll certainly allow people to measure where both teams are. Week 7 would then be what I consider to be the regular season game of the year. Now, people are going to argue that. That's fair. But I think Ohio State and Oregon, two fantastic programs, coupled with the fact that they are playing each other in a conference environment for the first time ever. They've played 10 games. I think Ohio State's won 9 out of the 10. But this Oregon team under Dan Lanning has been gearing up for the move to the Big Ten. They play a really tough style of ball, and they're also fast. They should be built to really stress Big Ten teams. This should be a matchup that's just a classic. Penn State's at USC that week, but again, I don't think that even holds a candle to what we're going to see. And I'm predicting that Ohio State and Oregon will be the highest ranked regular season game of the year in terms of TV ratings. We'll see if I'm right. The next week, week 8, Michigan at Illinois, and people are, how did Illinois creep into this? Well, how they crept into it is this is the 100th anniversary, a rededication of Memorial Stadium from when Red Grange ran for a ton of yards against Michigan 100 years ago. I believe it's like 100 years and one day off. It is going to be a fun game. Illinois, of course, still holds a lot of frustrations for a couple calls a couple years ago that didn't go their way in a close game against the Wolverines. The Illini are going to have to be playing at all cylinders to keep this one close. But on the home field, and Brett Bielema has pulled a lot of upsets in his tenure, it should be an exciting game. And then when you put the 100-year tradition on there, it really is an old-style Big Ten game, I think, that will draw a lot of eyes. Week 9, Penn State at Wisconsin. Again, Big Ten matchup. That should be a real measuring stick for how Wisconsin is doing. And of course, Penn State has in that frustrating situation where they have been stuck in the divisional structure behind Ohio State and Michigan. They've been having good seasons, probably would be in the 12-team playoff almost every year. But this year, they have another team, Oregon, that gets slotted in there. And so for Penn State, they have to be clicking. This is a game they will need to win. They want to be in position to challenge for the Big Ten title. You have to make sure you beat these type of teams. And Wisconsin's on its way up. They'll be wanting to pass up Penn State. There's a lot of good motivation for this to be a pretty hard-hitting game. Week 10, another one of those games that I think is going to be a huge ratings grab, Oregon at Michigan. So Oregon will have played the Buckeyes at home a few weeks earlier. Now they're going to go play the Wolverines in the Big House. That should be awesome. So we will see how Michigan is post Jim Harbaugh, post Connor Stallions, post 16 players drafted. It will be a fun game. And this Oregon team, it may be one of those games that they are starting to put their signature on a Big Ten title if they've been successful against Ohio State at home. Week 11, that's where we find Washington visiting Penn State. Again, a nice matchup. These teams have only played each other 3 times. Penn State's won them all. So we don't see this matchup very often. And Washington's going to be trying to come back, hit heavily by graduation and coach going to Alabama. And we just talked about what Penn State's going to want to do. So this is another one of those games. It's just key game after key game in the Big Ten. And then the next week, week 12, we're looking at Oregon, and they will be going to Wisconsin. Again, the Badgers, you can see also what type of schedule it is for these Big Ten teams. There's just tough game after tough game. Badgers will be able to prove how good they are. They're 3-3 against Oregon historically, but they're going to have to take on a powerful Oregon team, but they have Camp Randall and the home field advantage. Should be a game that people will be tuning into. That same week, Nebraska's at USC, 2 teams that don't play that often. Another exciting matchup, and it kind of depends on how those 2 teams do. If they both beat expectations, then that could be another game that's one of those highly rated games as well. Going into week 13, USC at UCLA. That game, I think, will be a big one just because of the tradition. You've got the 2 teams going at one another. I think it's one of those games that people will be watching. And UCLA, of course, got a lot of energy with a new coach. We'll see what they can put together. It's one of those programs that you always wonder why they're not better than they are. Terry Donahue had them at a high level, and it's been hard to get back to that. We'll see what can be done out there, but I think this is a matchup that people will be watching. And, of course, week 14 of the season, there's one game that rises above them all, Michigan and Ohio State. The reason I think it may not be the number one rated regular season game of the year, and I could be wrong, but if one of these or two, both these teams have a couple stumbles along the way, that may make it a little less attractive. So we'll see. But Ohio State is loaded for bear to try to beat Michigan. And one wonders for Ryan Day, what happens if they lose to Michigan again? Because if you ask John Cooper, that's a really, really hard hurdle to get over if you're the Ohio State coach who doesn't beat Michigan. Now, there's a close runner up that week. Washington will be at Oregon. That'll be a heck of a game. And of course, Notre Dame will be at USC. So there's three big games that week. You can see how the schedule makers really have some high level games every week of the season. It's pretty exciting what they've put together. I'm not saying expansion is the perfect thing, but at least we understand why expansion is there. Now, as we go to heat check number 2, I think one of the things that's most interesting about Illini recruiting is you see Will Riley. He is a top 10, top 15 player, moved up in class and still is very highly ranked. Going to be a 2024. He came to the University of Illinois, so he's there practicing. And our Kedrick Prince of the Illini guys did have an interview with Will Riley's mom. Now, everybody who's been a longtime subscriber of Illini guys can snicker. Ked just has this unique way of being a trustworthy guy. And we got a lot of information that I think is really, really interesting in this recruitment. And it shows how the Fighting Illini coaching staff has decided to work together on targeting recruits, and they've elevated the level of recruits that they're targeting. A key to this was Orlando Antigua. He had some relationships with the family and the player prior to coming to Illinois when he was at Kentucky. There's a lot of very good players that Kentucky identifies early on and goes after. And when Orlando came to Illinois, those relationships didn't just magically end. So this gives the Illini a real chance to have some success recruiting guys that maybe normally wouldn't exactly look at them, but because they know Orlando and Illinois was in the Elite Eight, all of a sudden the table's open a little bit. And so that gives the Illini room to push forward. Orlando's relationship was key to getting the Illini in late. And for folks who have ever met Orlando Antigua, he has a superpower, and that is to make you think that when he meets you, let's say at 4:00 in a day, he gives you that honest enthusiasm that you think to yourself, wow, when he got up this morning, he must have been excited to meet me. That is a very unique gift. In the world of sales, there aren't very many people who do that. It's the same in coaching. It's very rare, but you can see why Orlando is such a good coach when it comes to recruiting and how he deals with players because of that attitude. Now, one of the things that is really important is with the relationships that he brought to the table with Kentucky, a lot of those kids were 5 stars and they were recognized early on. How do you get recognized early on? Generally, there's 2 components. One is you're bigger, stronger, faster than other guys. And the other is you're more talented. And if you're bigger, stronger, faster, generally you have a positional size advantage. And then you've got the talent and the basketball skills that are necessary to be good. So that gives you that opportunity to bring in a guy like Will Riley who can shoot, he can handle the ball, he can go inside, go outside, and he's 6'8". That is a rare thing when you have guys of that size, and that forces all sorts of defensive issues. And he's more flexible on the defensive end because sometimes he can cover more people just because of his natural attributes. So that elevation of player is important. But the other thing that was really important when Kedrick talked to Will's mother is that Brad Underwood was a key component of this. She spoke very specifically that Brad picked them up from the hotel. That's got to be something to be waiting for a ride somewhere, and it's actually the head coach who comes and picks you up, and basically talked about how he was at every meeting. They loved his enthusiasm, and he had a plan for Will Riley. I think that is incredible because when you have a plan, that infers that you have sat down and strategically looked at what the player brings to the table, what you can do to make him better, what your team and your program has to leverage to do those things. And I think they saw that. A key component was Adam Fletcher, widely regarded as the best strength and conditioning coach in the country. He is an asset that can be leveraged as well. And Riley is thin. Well, we all were at 18, right? So he's got some opportunities to put on muscle. That is a awesome, awesome combination to have Adam Fletcher here. And the fact that Brad Underwood was the man putting on the charm and closing the deal. And that is great because he's got unbelievable recruiting staff. Orlando Antigua, Tim Anderson, Jeff Alexander. And there's probably recruits that Brad Underwood doesn't have to work too hard to do that with because his staff is so good. But when you have the staff together with the head coach, that is incredible. And it allowed the Illini to get in on a player who is extremely highly ranked and come in behind some blue bloods and walk away with an incredible player that will be on the roster. That is something different for Illini recruiting, and it's been very good under Brad Underwood and his staffs. The other thing that is really interesting is his mother noted that nothing is guaranteed. He's got to play for his minutes. That breaks the mold for what many teams are doing, which is promising you're going to come play X amount of minutes for us. When you have players who know that they have to earn the minutes, that is a better way to go. And I would tell people to watch Eye on the Illini and or listen. Either way you want to get that podcast, YouTube or audio, doesn't matter to me. But Eddie Johnson talked about his freshman year, how he didn't get to play as much. And he was a parade All-American second teamer. And he didn't play much his first year because he wasn't strong enough. And he then had to rededicate and really work hard in the weight room because Coach Henson told him, you have to get stronger. And instead of transferring out or pushing back, Eddie Johnson went in and got bigger, stronger, faster, worked on his shooting skills, and became a fixture in the Illini lineup for 3 more years, and then was an NBA player for 17 years. So when you make a player earn it, that is better for the player. It's better for the team. And I think parents who are reinforcing that are fantastic. And I think the fact that the Illini could get this level of player without guaranteeing this, that, and the other thing is fantastic. And that helps set the tone that you want to set for a team. Just a remarkable job by the staff. I know there's a lot of people who've talked about that. I tend to look at it like some of the smaller details, but to me, setting the tone by having a very, very talented kid come in and he knows he's got to earn his minutes, that pays off tremendously in the season and at the end of the season when over the course of the year, this whole team is developed and guys have earned their minutes. Now it's time to go into the NCAA and win. And when you have the talent that this roster has, you're going to have to play well to maintain your starting spot. And good players on this type of team, they go deep in the NCAA tournament. Heat check number 3. John Cena retiring from the WWE was a moment that I expected. And I was actually glad he did it a little bit younger in life, although, again, that is wrestling. So somebody will probably offer him tons of money to come back and wrestle. We'll have to see how strong-willed he is and how much money he makes in Hollywood where he doesn't want to get thrown around for it. But for those people who are familiar, Cena is the 16-time world champion. He's tied with Ric Flair, but there's 2 caveats to that. One, all Cena's titles, world titles, were in the WWE. Flair's were in other federations as part of that. And then Flair also says he has more than that. I'm a big Ric Flair fan. Who knows how many he actually had, but it's more than the 16 that he has right now, according to Rick. Of course, people don't really remember, but John Cena was actually a trash talking rapper when he debuted back in 2002. That was actually Thugonomics. It was actually pretty funny. If you go back and look at some of those old films, he was really good at it. And sometimes, even if you don't have a good gimmick, you just got to dive into it to prove to the people running the company that you'll do your best in any situation. Over the course of his career, he really carried the WWE for probably a decade. He had historic feuds with Randy Orton, CM Punk, AJ Styles. He had a couple big matches against The Rock. So a little intergenerational matches there. He is a guy who has done a ton for the sport, and he has been a good guy since 2005. When people told him, oh, you need to be a bad guy, you need to be like Hulk Hogan when he ran the NWO, he went from Hulk Hogan to Hollywood. That is not what Cena chose to do. He stays as a good guy. And he was a main eventer up until 2018, and then he became a part timer. But he was the type of guy who built up younger wrestlers. He knew he had a name. He allows himself to get beat so that the younger wrestler can look better and build credibility in the eyes of the fans. If you have a Mount Rushmore of WWE wrestlers, guys who were just in the WWE, I'm not saying their total career, but Bruno Sammartino would be up there. He actually carried the WWE for a long time in the 60s and early 70s. You have to put Hulk Hogan because you wouldn't have the pro wrestling of today without his massive run in the 80s. People remember him initially from being Thunder Lips in Rocky 3 when he was the wrestler that Burgess Meredith couldn't believe how big he was. And that kind of sprungboard his career. And then you had the first person, and if you're listening, you didn't see my air quotes, but the first person to body slam Andre the Giant, although we can see tons of people who did that before that, but hey, it's wrestling. He had that in WrestleMania 3, I believe, and it was just a huge moment. The next guy on there, you'd probably have Stone Cold Steve Austin. For a short period of time, he was probably the most popular wrestler in the history of the WWE. Unfortunately, he had a neck injury that prevented him from wrestling as much, which really opened the door for The Rock to become so popular. And the fourth person on there, I would put John Cena. He carried wrestling, especially when there were some rough times, and he carried the WWE. Now, other people would argue The Rock needs to be there. I think his best work was done post his wrestling career, where he's become incredibly popular. And some people would put Shawn Michaels in there. But again, I think Cena is one that would make the WWE Mount Rushmore. If you like John Cena, he's on all sorts of things. You hear him on Honda commercials. You can see him on his amazing series on Max, used to be HBO, called The Peacemaker. Very good. And he's in the Fast and Furious franchise and does a ton of movies. He's really developed his career, built on it one step at a time. And if you ever saw his first movie, The Marine, he's done a lot of good things in improving his skills. I'm not saying he's Robert De Niro, but he has improved his skill set. But the one thing I want to say about John Cena is he's never been my favorite wrestler, but he has been a staunch supporter of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And he has done over 650 wishes for people. That is incredible what he does for kids and the time he gives. And he doesn't necessarily try to get press coverage for it, but he's just there showing up and doing that work. Second place in Make a Wish is somewhere right around 200 to give you a perspective of what he's done. So he's the Wayne Gretzky, Babe Ruth of Make a Wish. And to my way of thinking, there's a special place that he goes to in my respect, just because of his willingness to help kids who are in such horrible needs. And I think that's fantastic. People don't talk about it a lot, but he keeps doing that even when he's in Hollywood. Guy sets a heck of an example. It's really hard not to like a guy who acts like that and puts his money where his mouth is and spends that amount of time. So with that, those are the three heat checks for this week. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we will see you next week. Till then, keep going forward.